Going into the grand bargain, going into the negotiations that will determine whether or not we go over the fiscal cliff, the Republicans are being very clear that they're willing to negotiate. Or are they? So we have some quotes that are going to demonstrate what I think is faux moderation and faux willingness to compromise, and is actually the same hardcore, hardline stance on taxes that they've ever had. So let's go first to House Speaker John Boehner. He says, "For the purposes of forging a bipartisan agreement that begins to solve the problem, we're willing to accept new revenue under the right conditions." Now, just briefly, if you just read those words, that sounds pretty reasonable. They're willing to accept new revenue.
Unless you've paid attention to the news and know anything about John Boehner, in which case, no, it does not.
Yeah, so let's continue and see if it sounds just as reasonable. What matters is where the increased revenue comes from and what type of reform comes with it. Does the increased revenue come from government taking a larger share of what the American people earn through higher tax rates? Or does it come as a byproduct of growing our economy, energized by a simpler, cleaner, fairer tax code with fewer loopholes and lower rates for all? So what he is actually saying when you decode his words are, we might be willing to compromise by lowering taxes.
Which is just laughable. It's literally laughable. It's insane. And this is the exact same principle that Romney won, or that he ran on and lost, which is that he wanted to lower tax rates across the board by 20% and then make up for that by closing loopholes and limiting the number of deductions that you can take. And nonpartisan analysis said that's not going to pay for itself. So obviously that's not true. And even in the case that you weren't lowering taxes, and let's say that we are just putting a cap on the amount of deductions that you're allowed to take, and we're closing loopholes for the rich, even if you do that, like Nancy Pelosi said, that still does not generate enough revenue. So yes, that probably does need to be done, but the reality is you're also going to need to raise tax rates. And obviously nobody likes to see their taxes go up. Nobody likes to have money taken out of their paycheck. But when you look back through history, we always have a better economy when tax rates are higher. We saw that under the Clinton administration. We've seen it several times throughout history in the past. Republicans like to push this idea that lower tax rates will lead to better job growth and a better economy. And then there was that study a couple weeks ago that finally came out where they found out that there's actually no correlation at all between lower tax rates for the wealthy and increased job growth. And yet Republicans tried to brush that under the rug and say, like, oh yeah, don't release that study because that doesn't look very good on us. Well, guess what? It's just like nobody wants higher taxes. It's not fun. But that is what's going to need to happen if the economy is going to get any better. Yeah, it's not impossible that lowering taxes could be better for the economy. It's just that based on the historic evidence that we have, and we do have decades of higher and lower tax rates, it doesn't seem to be true. How much longer, how many more recessions do we need to have before we learn that lesson? I don't remember the particular numbers, but a couple of months ago, Jenks showed a chart that showed the total number of jobs created under Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, and it was ridiculous how much higher it was under the Democrats, despite the fact that for a large portion of that, prior to Clinton, the tax rates were way higher. The top marginal tax rate was like 71%. It was as high as 91%, I think, under Johnson or sometime around then. So we can choose or choose not to learn from these historic examples. The Republicans seem to be clear on where they stand on that. I got a couple more quotes I want to get to, just so that you understand that this is not just John Boehner. Other people are echoing this fake willingness to compromise. This is Rep. Tom Price from Georgia. He says, "We need to look at increasing revenue through pro-growth policies as well as tax revenue. Tax revenue, which means broadening the base, lowering the rates, closing the loopholes, limiting the deductions, limiting the credits, and making certain that we identify the appropriate spending reductions so that we have indeed a balanced approach." What he was talking about there was not raising taxes, not raising tax revenue. It was about lowering taxes, revenue be damned. Right. They just must think that people aren't listening to what they're saying, because if you listen to that at all and you hear, we want to raise revenue from taxes by lowering taxes, that is impossible. Yes, you can, obviously that's impossible. You're not going to get more taxes by asking people to pay less taxes. Now you can throw in some things in there like lowering or closing some loopholes and stuff like that, but as we've talked about time and time again, it just is not going to make up for the loss.
Yeah, okay, why don't we go to one of our videos actually. Let's go to Governor Scott Walker talking about this, because I hope that someday this will be used against him, so I want it to be on the record. Let's take a look.
Well, I think you look at the contrast between Washington and what's happening in each of our state houses. The vast majority of us who were new governors 2 years ago inherited major budget deficits in our states. We balance those deficits without raising taxes. In fact, in states like Wisconsin, we actually cut taxes over the past 2 years, and revenues have gone up. I think most Americans, not just those in politics, most Americans look at what's happening in Washington and think they're missing the boat.
I don't know if our audio is on, but did you notice there that his eyes are completely dead? It's like Wall Street is just speaking through his eyes. Usually that's a metaphor. It seems to be correct in his case. So anyway, there were a lot of Republicans who were echoing the same sort of talk. I don't think that the Democrats are being fooled by it. Hopefully viewers of this program, at least, are also not being fooled by it. But we'll see as we go into the negotiations whether or not Barack Obama will be hamstrung by their faux reasons.
And keep in mind, the Senate has passed a bill that would extend the Bush tax cuts for all of Americans except for the top 2%.
Exactly.
And that's sitting in the House right now because Republicans still refuse to pass it. So keep in mind, the Democrats aren't even trying to raise taxes across the board. They're only trying to raise them on the top 2% of Americans. And yet, Republicans are holding that hostage just to get what they want, which is tax cuts for the wealthy. And on that same Fox News program, Bobby Jindal said, "We're not the party of the rich. The rich can take care of themselves." That's a complete bull. You absolutely are the party of the rich.
But the first part is bull. They certainly can
they absolutely
take
can take care of themselves, but the Republicans are the party of
Yeah.
the rich, and all that they do is try to enact policies that are going to favor the rich and make sure that this this extension of the Bush tax cuts for everybody else won't go through until they get what they want.
Yeah, we don't have time to go to the Chris Wallace video, unfortunately, but he also said that when you could get the tax cuts for everybody but the 2%, how does it not look like you're the party of the rich when you fight for those last 2%?
Yeah.
Chris Wallace being uncharacteristically reasonable.
Right.
Yes.